Parker Schnabel has dug for gold across continents, but nothing could have prepared him for the wild heart of Brazil. Flying into the Amazon rainforest is like entering an entirely new world. The green stretched on forever, no cities, no highways, just thick jungle somewhere. In the middle of the endless green was a gold mine that supposedly produced some of the world's purest gold, 99.9% pure, worth nearly $400 million, and Parker, he wanted to see it. With his own eyes, you'd think he'd seen it all by now, but the look on his face as he stepped out into Brazil says it. All this is new, this is raw, this is something you can't find in Alaska or the Yukon. The mission was pretty straightforward. He had to find out if this mine was pulling off the impossible, and maybe, just maybe, learn a few tricks he could bring back to his own operation. But deep down you could feel the tension, because in this business where there's gold, there's always something more. Something hidden, something no one talks about. So Parker sets off into the unknown to acquire the secret for himself. The journey to the mine wasn't just scenic, it was a reminder that wealth often hides in the most unforgiving places. Winding roads were barely wide enough for a truck, mud thick enough to trap even the toughest equipment, but that doesn't stop the locals. This is their turf, and they've turned the jungle into a gold field. Is just the amount of ground. I'm just amazed by the size of the areas that we've seen that are being mined. Normally gold follows a bit of a pay streak, and it's generally not thousands of feet wide, which piques my interest. The mine sits just outside Pisoto de Avedo, a name not many know unless you're in the business, but everyone is missing out, because this region is sitting on a literal fortune. As Parker approached the site, he saw a massive floating dredge churning through sediment. There were giant machines gliding across murky waters, scooping up the earth like it was nothing. This wasn't some backyard panning operation. It was industrial, smart, and ruthless. They knew what they were doing, and they weren't here to play. Mining a fortune isn't child's play, and that is exactly what Parker wanted to find out. How were they doing it? But what surprised Parker wasn't the machinery, it was the scale of the operation. The size of the mine was unreal. It was like a small city carved into the jungle, operating 24/7 with a single goal: find every ounce of gold hiding beneath the surface. And trust me, they're doing a damn good job. At the heart of the operation stood two men, Gilberto and his son Maicon. They didn't seek the spotlight. There were no big speeches, no showy setups. But what they had built in the middle of the Brazilian jungle was hard to ignore. Even Parker, who had seen gold mining in some of the toughest conditions around the world, paid close attention to how they worked. That stuff has a lot of clay in it, right? Yeah, they have clay all over. It's a mess. I bet since the ground conditions are so bad, is there normally a lot of gold in the clay? Gilberto had been mining for decades. He had started small with basic tools and very little support. Over the years, he had shaped that effort into something impressive, a full-scale mining system capable of producing gold bars that met global purity standards. He had done it quietly, steadily, and with a deep understanding of the land he worked on. My son had taken that foundation and added a new layer. He was younger, more technical, and focused on bringing in smart tools, drones for surveying data to guide decisions, and tracking systems to cut down on waste, while Gilberto carried the history and experience Maicon brought in precision and speed. Together, they had created a balance: old-school knowledge matched with modern tools. When Parker toured the site with them, he didn't say much at first, but he watched everything: how the workers moved, how the systems were set up, how decisions were made on the ground. It didn't take long for him to see that this wasn't just a lucky strike. It was a well-run, carefully built machine. He asked questions not just out of politeness, but because there was real value in what they had figured out here. It was clear to him and to anyone paying attention that Gilberto and Mian had tapped into something that worked in gold mining. Success wasn't only about the metal, it was about the systems behind it, the people who kept it moving, and the knowledge that could mean the difference between surviving one season or thriving for decades. One of the most surprising parts of the operation was how heavily it relied on the river. Instead of digging into the ground or hauling dirt from deep pits, the team used floating dredges, large machines that essentially acted as mining boats. A lot of places use trommels that are floating on a barge and feed them with an excavator from the land, and so they'll sit on the bank and dig the dirt out of the bank and put them in the trommel that's on a boat. And then they just move the pond with the system before they skimmed across the surface, pulling up rivered material and separating out the gold from everything else. Parker watched as the dredges worked in a steady rhythm, pulling up a constant stream of sand, clay, and gravel. The raw material was sent through a series of onboard systems that filtered and processed it in real time. It was a clean, organized setup, and clearly well practiced. Everything about the process was fast and efficient. There was no trial and error. The operators knew exactly what they were doing, and every part of the system had a specific purpose. It wasn't the kind of gold mining most people imagine. No panning, no digging with shovels. This was industrial scale mining designed for volume. The river was basically being used like a moving belt, delivering material to the dredges non-stop. Still, he had questions. How sustainable was this setup? Could the river keep producing gold at this rate? And what would happen when the easy material ran out? The system worked, that much was obvious, but the long-term impact that was harder to predict. What really sets this place apart is the custom-built wash plant. It weighs 25 tons and was completely fabricated on site. Yeah, you heard that right, in the middle of the jungle without access to any major manufacturing facilities. These guys built a massive industrial-grade wash plant from scratch. Parker's probably thinking, why don't we have something like this back home? And it's not just the size, it's how well it works. Every nut, bolt, and weld has a purpose. There's no wasted space, no wasted movement. It's built to survive that Amazon and keep churning out gold. Obviously, Jaberto and Michael here have a real desire to improve their recovery rate, improve their efficiency, and run a good operation. And I love that a lot of thought went into this plant. It's a pretty ingenious solution, albeit big and cumbersome in terms of pretty much has to be in a stationary setup. This kind of innovation only comes when your back is against the wall, when the nearest hardware store is 100 miles away, and downtime means losing thousands of dollars a day. It's a gritty, raw engineering genius, and Parker, he's soaking it all in. The real story of the mine wasn't just in the digging, it was in what came after. What happened once the raw material was pulled from the ground. That was where things got interesting. This mine didn't deal in flakes or dust. The gold that came out of this place ended up as solid bars, heavy, smooth, and nearly perfect in purity. But the journey from muddy sediment to a finished bar of gold was anything but simple. The first step involved mercury. It was used to bind with the fine gold particles that were too small to be caught by traditional methods. Once the gold stuck to the mercury, the mixture was heated, separating the two elements. What was left behind was raw, gleaming gold. It was a method that had been used for years in different parts of the world. Effective, yes, but also controversial. Mercury could be dangerous, especially for the environment. The team at the mine worked carefully to contain and control it, but the risk was always there. The process was fast and efficient, but it carried a quiet tension underneath. Then came the part that felt almost ceremonial. The smelting. The gold was heated until it turned molten, glowing bright orange. As it reached its melting point, it was then poured into molds, filling them with liquid metal that slowly cooled into solid bars. Each bar was stamped with its weight and purity, then set aside like a finished product rolling off an invisible assembly line. There was something magnetic about the transformation. Watching rough, dirty material turn into something that looked flawless was both technical and oddly satisfying. It was the kind of process that seemed simple on the surface, but behind it were years of experience, precision, and control. Still, for all its brilliance, the process raised questions. How long could mercury be used this way before it caused damage that couldn't be undone? And if not mercury, what came next? The gold was pure, but the method, that part, remained a little murky. Tucked deep in the Brazilian landscape stood Serra Pelada, a name once known around the world decades ago. It had been the epicenter of Brazil's biggest gold rush. Now it looked more like a scar left behind by a storm. The site had changed. What used to be a hive of human activity was now a wide water-filled 2.6 million ounces in that hole. Like, how much was there? Though that question really bothers me. The surrounding land, once stripped bare, had begun to recover. Trees crept in. Slowly grass pushed through the dirt, but the damage and the history couldn't be hidden. In the early 1980s, this place had drawn tens of thousands of men, all chasing the same thing, gold. They came with shovel sacks and whatever tools they could carry. Most had no experience. Many had no plan, but they came anyway, pulled by the hope of striking it rich. The stories were wild men digging side by side in steep makeshift pits, earth moving by hand, entire hills disappearing in weeks. It wasn't organized, it wasn't safe, but it was real, and for a while it worked. Some found gold, a few walked away with fortunes, others were buried in mudslides, caught in fights, or simply faded into the crowd. Empty-handed. Serra Pelada was a place where dreams and desperation lived side by side. Now, decades later, the site stood quiet. The chaos was gone, the noise replaced by wind and water, but the past still hung in the air, thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. What made it powerful wasn't just what had happened there, but how fast it had all come and gone. The rush, the madness, the collapse. It was a reminder that even the richest gold strikes don't last forever, and behind every big find there's a trail of stories, most of them unfinished. At the center of the mine's workshop, the final moment unfolded. The poor molten gold, glowing bright and almost white hot, flowed steadily into a waiting mold. The heat from the metal filled the air, casting a soft pulsing light across the room. For a few seconds, everything slowed down. No machines buzzed, no one spoke. All eyes were on the liquid metal settling into shape. Then came the stillness. The gold began to cool, steam rose, the surface hardened, changing color with each passing second, from a fiery glow to a dull, rich sheen. It was no longer just metal, it was now a gold bar, a finished product, a physical result of weeks, sometimes months of work, digging, refining, and risk. The room stayed quiet, not out of ceremony, but because everyone understood what that bar represented. There was a weight to it beyond just the kilograms. It carried the story of the ground. It came from the machines that moved it, the hands that managed it. When the final test came back 99.9% purity, there were no cheers, just quiet satisfaction. The job had been done right. That bar wasn't just valuable, it was proof that the system worked, proof that gold was still there beneath layers of clay and stone, waiting to be pulled out by those who knew how. Today was one of my favorite dates that I've had on a gold mine. Some of the friendliest gold miners I've ever met. They have a hard rock prospect and they have a diamond drill, and they're drilling hard rock. Nobody in the Yukon does that, and somewhere in that cooled metal was a reminder. Gold was more than a mineral, it was a goal, a chase, a reason people ventured into places others never would. It was a reward earned, not given. Before the visit ended, Maicon and Hilberto took time to sit down and reflect. They talked about how the mine had grown, the obstacles they had worked through, and the systems they had built from the ground up. There had been setbacks, weather, machinery, market shifts, but each one had pushed them to find new ways forward. Wasn't just in its output, it was in the way it adapted. The mine was fast but careful, large but controlled. Every part of it was designed to make the most of what was available without pushing the land too far. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. What made it stand out wasn't a secret machine or some rare trick. It was the mindset, a steady focus on solving problems, improving methods, and thinking long-term. In the world of gold mining, nothing stayed the same for long. Markets moved, land shifted, equipment failed. The ones who lasted weren't always the biggest. They were the ones who could adjust without losing momentum. That was the real lesson Parker had come for. Adapt, improve, and keep going, because in this trade, survival depended on more than just finding gold. It depended on knowing how to stay ahead of the next challenge, even when you didn't see it coming. As Parker's visit came to an end, the mine stood quiet for a moment. The machine still ran, and the crew kept working, but there was a noticeable pause. Like the land itself was catching its breath. The mine wasn't just a place where gold was pulled from the ground. It was a system, a mindset, and a mirror of what was possible when experience, risk, and vision came together. What had started as an idea in the middle of the forest had become a model, one that proved success didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needed to work. This wasn't just about money. That part was clear. The gold had value, yes, but the real richness was in the effort, the decisions made under pressure, the setbacks faced without giving up, and the trust built between people who worked side by side. It was in the way the mine respected the land even while pushing it to give more. When Parker looked closely, he realized the truth. Gold rewarded the ones who kept going, not lucky people, but rather people who were consistent in their efforts.